A rich cowboy saves a freezing ranch girl at train station. Their love story shook the whole town. It was one of those winter nights when the cold seemed to cut deeper than usual. The wind howled across the small town like it was carrying voices from faraway places. The streets were empty, save for the occasional flicker of light from a lantern in a window, or the distant sound of a horse trotting on a frozen road. Most of the townsfolk had already retreated to their warm homes, closing doors against the bitter night. Few noticed what, or who, stood on the train platform that evening. The platform itself was simple, made of worn wooden planks, and it creaked under every step. Snow had begun to fall lightly, coating the ground in a thin, slippery layer of white. There she stood, a young girl barely 16, though the hardships on her face made her seem older. Her coat was thin, her hat threadbare, and the gloves she wore had holes at the fingertips. Her eyes, wide and alert, scanned the empty platform as though searching for someone who might care, someone who might notice her struggle. But no one did. She had traveled many miles that day, leaving behind a small, failing ranch that had once been her family's pride. Her parents were gone, taken by illness years before, and her older brother had moved west in search of work he'd never found. Left alone, she had tried to keep the ranch going, but the winter had been too harsh, the debts too heavy. When she realized she could no longer stay, she had gathered what little she owned, some clothes, a worn blanket, and a few tools, and set out toward the nearest town, hoping for work, or at least a warm place to sleep. But now, standing on the frozen platform, she felt the weight of exhaustion pressing on her shoulders. Every step had become a struggle, and the snow that had started lightly was now dusting her hair and shoulders, sticking to her eyelashes, chilling her skin through her thin coat. Her teeth chattered, not only from the cold but from the fear that no one would help her. She had seen townspeople walking past, their faces averted, their hands tucked deep into warm pockets. No one stopped. It was as if she had become invisible. Hours passed. She tried to keep moving, rocking on her heels, stomping her feet, or wrapping herself tighter in her thin blanket. Nothing seemed to work. Her fingers grew numb and her feet ached, the wooden platform cold and unyielding beneath her boots. Every passing moment brought a deeper realization. If someone didn't help soon, she might not make it through the night. Just when hope was beginning to fade, the distant sound of a train whistle echoed through the town. Its high, lonely cry seemed almost mournful, yet it carried with it a promise of life, of movement, of change. She stepped forward instinctively, craning her neck to see the approaching train. Lights glimmered faintly on the horizon, and she felt a small flicker of relief. Maybe someone would arrive. Maybe she would finally find warmth. As the train grew nearer, a figure appeared on the platform. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, with a presence that seemed to command attention without effort. His coat was heavy and clean, his boots polished, and his hat sat firmly on his head, shielding his eyes from the falling snow. He carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had faced challenges before and emerged stronger for them. Though he looked like a man used to authority and wealth, his eyes, sharp and observant, softened when they met hers. He paused for a moment, just long enough to notice her trembling in the cold. Most people would have walked past, pretending not to see, but not him. He stepped closer, his boots crunching against the snow, and his gaze followed her every movement. There was no judgment in his eyes, only a quiet understanding of hardship. He had seen struggle before, and he knew it when he saw it again. "Are you all right, miss?" he asked gently, his voice steady and warm. There was no hint of impatience or surprise, only concern. She shook her head, unable to find words. Her lips were chapped, her voice barely a whisper, lost in the wind. "Come with me," he said simply, holding out a gloved hand. The offer was direct, but there was no force behind it. It was a choice, a lifeline, and in that moment, she felt the first spark of hope she had known in days. Hesitant but desperate, she stepped forward. Her boots slipped slightly on the icy platform, but he reached out, steadying her, anchoring her against the cold. The train came to a slow, hissing stop, steam curling into the night like a ghost. Passengers disembarked, some carrying luggage, some rushing to meet friends. Yet the man did not let go of her hand, and she clung to it instinctively, as if it were the only thing keeping her tethered to the warmth of the world. People moved around them, busy with their own concerns, but in that small space, it was as if only the two of them existed. He led her away from the platform and toward a small, nearby inn he had arranged for the night. Inside, the warmth hit her like a wave. The heat from the fireplace, the smell of wood smoke mixed with cooking, and the soft chatter of people made her feel both comforted and overwhelmed. She had not known comfort like this in weeks, perhaps months. The man guided her to a chair by the fire, gently removing her wet hat and coat, and draping a heavy blanket over her shoulders. For the first time she could move her fingers again, could feel her toes, could take a deep breath without shivering. The man brought her a cup of warm tea, and though she barely trusted it at first, the heat and flavor revived her spirits. She sipped slowly, the warmth spreading through her body like sunlight through ice. He sat across from her, quiet but watchful. "What's your name?" he asked after a while. Mary Carter," she whispered. Her voice was small, fragile, but the hint of relief in it could not be masked. "Mary," he repeated softly, as if tasting the name. "I'm Thomas Reed. You're safe now. You don't have to worry tonight." Mary's eyes welled with tears, not just from the cold, but from the overwhelming sense of being seen and cared for. She had expected indifference, perhaps even scorn. Instead, she had found compassion, and for a girl who had been alone for so long, that simple act of kindness felt like a miracle. The inn was quiet, the fire crackling softly as they sat in silence. Thomas did not press her for details, though he could sense the story behind her eyes. He simply waited, allowing her to gather herself, to let the terror and exhaustion of the past days ease slightly. Mary, in turn, felt an unfamiliar comfort in his presence. There was no rush, no demand, only the steady, patient attention that made her feel human again. Outside, the wind continued to blow, and snowflakes swirled against the window pane. But inside, by the fire, a fragile warmth began to grow, not just from the heat, but from the connection forming between two strangers. Mary realized that this man, this wealthy cowboy who could have ignored her, had instead chosen to step into her life. And that choice, seemingly small, had changed everything. The night passed slowly. Thomas ensured she had food, a dry place to sleep, and a warm blanket. He even went out briefly to speak with the innkeeper, arranging for her to remain safe until morning. Mary lay in the bed provided, staring at the ceiling, thinking of the kindness she had just experienced. She had never imagined that someone like him would care. And yet, here he was, a stranger, a hero, a protector. As the fire died down and the wind howled outside, Mary finally drifted into a deep, untroubled sleep. For the first time in weeks, she felt safe. And Thomas, sitting quietly nearby, watched over her with a sense of responsibility that went beyond mere charity. He knew he could not abandon her now, not when she had nowhere else to turn. That night marked the beginning of something neither of them could have anticipated. A single act of compassion, simple, unassuming, yet profound, had begun to weave the first threads of a connection that would change both of their lives. Mary, the freezing ranch girl, had been saved, and Thomas, the rich cowboy, had unknowingly set the stage for a story that would shake the whole town. It was only the beginning. The next morning, Mary awoke to the soft light of dawn filtering through the inn's frosted windows. The warmth of the blanket and the lingering scent of the fire made her feel almost unreal, like she had stepped into another world, one far removed from the freezing platform of the previous night. For a moment she lingered in bed, listening to the quiet murmurs of the inn as the day began. There were footsteps in the hall, the clatter of dishes in the kitchen, and the faint laughter of early risers. It was a normal morning, but for Mary it felt extraordinary. She rose carefully, still wrapped in the blanket Thomas had draped over her, and peered out the window. Snow had fallen throughout the night, covering the streets in a pristine layer of white. Smoke curled from chimneys, and a few horses clopped through the town square, their breath visible in the cold air. The scene was peaceful, almost beautiful. Yet Mary knew she could not stay hidden forever. She had come to this town seeking work, and her options were limited. Thomas entered quietly, carrying a tray with a simple breakfast, bread, a small piece of butter, and a cup of warm tea. He set it on the small table near the window. "Good morning," he said, his voice calm and steady.
"You should eat something before the day begins. It's not much, but it will give you strength." Mary hesitated, unsure of how to respond.
She had never been treated with such kindness by someone she had just met. Normally, a person in her situation would have been met with suspicion, or worse, ignored entirely. But Thomas did not ask for anything in return. He did not demand explanations or gratitude. He simply offered what he could: warmth, food, and a moment of safety. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice still weak from the night's cold. She took the tea in her hands, feeling its warmth seep into her frozen fingers. The bread, though simple, tasted like a feast. She ate slowly, savoring every bite, letting herself feel nourished for the first time in days. Thomas watched her quietly, careful not to rush her. He had learned long ago that patience was often more valuable than words. After she had eaten, he spoke again. "Mary, I know you have nowhere to go right now. You don't have to leave this town immediately. There is work here, and there are people who need help. You can stay as long as you need to recover." Mary looked at him, startled. This offer was beyond anything she had imagined. She had expected shelter for a night, maybe two, and then the long, harsh reality of the world would resume. But Thomas was giving her more than shelter. He was giving her a choice, and the freedom to rebuild. I don't know what to say," she whispered, unsure if words could express the gratitude she felt. "You don't need to say anything," Thomas replied. "Just take today to rest. Tomorrow we can see what can be done about work or other arrangements. For now, just focus on regaining your strength." For the rest of the morning, Mary stayed in the inn, resting by the fire. She watched as townspeople went about their daily routines, noticing the way people interacted, the care they showed to neighbors, and the occasional harshness toward those less fortunate. It reminded her of the world outside her small ranch, where kindness could be scarce, and survival was never guaranteed. But here, in this small place with Thomas's protection, she felt a tentative hope take root. By midday, Thomas suggested they take a walk through the town. The snow had softened into a gentle flurry, and the sunlight reflected off the white streets, making the town sparkle. Mary wrapped her scarf tightly and followed him outside. She moved slowly at first, her legs stiff from the cold, but she soon found herself enjoying the crisp air and the quiet beauty of the morning. As they walked, Thomas pointed out the small businesses, the stable where horses were cared for, and the few families who had lived in the town for generations. There is work to be found, he explained. Some of it is hard, but it pays well for those willing to try. You just need the right guidance and a little patience. Mary listened intently, absorbing every detail. She had been on her own for so long that it was rare to find someone willing to explain, to teach, rather than judge. The attention itself felt like a gift, a way of showing that she had value, that her experiences and her efforts mattered. When they returned to the inn, Thomas introduced her to the innkeeper, a kindly woman named Mrs. Callahan, who offered her a warm smile and a place to stay while she settled her affairs. "You're safe here, Mrs. Callahan said. "No one will turn you away." Mary nodded, feeling tears well up once more. The kindness she encountered in this town was unlike anything she had known, and it made her both grateful and cautious. She had learned to trust sparingly, and yet something in Thomas's manner suggested that trust would not be misplaced. Over the next few days, Thomas continued to help Mary in practical ways. He guided her toward opportunities to earn money, helped her obtain supplies she needed, and introduced her to townspeople who could offer advice or employment. All the while he remained patient and respectful, never rushing her, never demanding more than she could give. Mary began to realize that he was not only wealthy and influential, but also genuinely compassionate, a rare combination that made him stand out in the town. As they spent time together, Mary found herself opening up in small ways. She told Thomas about the ranch she had tried to maintain, about the winters that had taken her family, and about the fear of being alone in a world that often seemed indifferent. Thomas listened without interruption, acknowledging her hardships without pity. He offered guidance, encouragement, and practical advice, but he did so in a way that preserved her dignity. Through these conversations, a quiet bond began to form. Mary felt a sense of security she had not known since her childhood. She began to trust not only Thomas's intentions, but also the possibility that her life could change for the better. And Thomas, in turn, found himself impressed by her resilience, her intelligence, and her determination. She was more than a girl in need. She was someone capable of facing challenges head-on, someone whose presence enriched the town and, unexpectedly, his own life. Word of Mary's arrival and Thomas's help began to circulate through the town. Some people admired his generosity, speaking quietly about the rare compassion of a man with influence. Others whispered behind closed doors, questioning why a wealthy cowboy would involve himself with a struggling ranch girl. Thomas was aware of the scrutiny, but he did not let it alter his behavior. He believed in doing what was right, not what was expected, and he continued to support Mary quietly and steadily. One afternoon, as they walked along the edge of the town, Thomas stopped and looked at her with a serious expression. "Mary," he said, "people may talk. Some will misunderstand what we are doing, but you must know that their opinions do not matter. What matters is that you are safe, that you have a chance to rebuild, and that you have the freedom to decide your own path." Mary nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and determination. She knew the path ahead would not be easy. There would be challenges, moments of doubt, and perhaps even setbacks. But for the first time in months, she felt that she could face them, not alone, but with support and guidance. That evening, as snow fell softly against the windows of the inn, Mary sat by the fire and reflected on the changes that had begun in her life. She had arrived at the town exhausted, frightened, and alone. Now she had warmth, food, guidance, and a sense of purpose. More importantly, she had someone who believed in her, someone who had chosen to stand by her when most had walked past. Thomas watched her quietly from across the room, a faint smile playing on his lips. He understood that true change did not come from grand gestures alone, but from steady, consistent support. And he knew that the bond forming between them, built on trust, respect, and shared experience, was stronger than any rumor or judgment the town might offer. By the time the fire burned low and the inn grew quiet, Mary felt a deep sense of calm. She had faced the night alone and survived. But now she understood that survival was only part of life. There was hope, opportunity, and even the possibility of something more. A life rebuilt, a future shaped by choices rather than circumstance. And though neither of them spoke of it aloud, both Mary and Thomas sensed that this was only the beginning. The snow would melt, the town would continue its routines, and challenges would come. But together, they had taken the first steps toward a story that neither of them could have predicted, a story of resilience, trust, and the quiet power of kindness. The morning air was crisp, and the sun barely managed to break through the gray clouds that hung low over the small town. Mary had grown accustomed to the routines here: quiet streets, the soft clatter of horse hooves, and the occasional smoke rising from chimneys. But that morning she sensed something different. Whispers floated through the streets as she walked with Thomas toward the market, the townspeople glancing at them with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. Mary felt a strange nervousness. She had been welcomed at the inn and guided toward work opportunities, but the reality of the town's attention was different. Some people smiled kindly, nodding greetings. Others stared openly, murmuring among themselves. It was clear that Thomas's decision to help her was stirring opinions. She did not ignore it, but she tried to walk with her head high, determined not to show her fear. Thomas noticed her hesitation. "Ignore them," he said quietly, his voice calm but firm. "People talk, Mary, some with admiration, some with doubt. Their opinions are not yours to bear." She nodded, but the murmurs persisted. At the market, merchants paused in their work to glance at the pair, and children whispered to each other, pointing discreetly. Mary realized that her arrival had become a topic of conversation, not for the kindness shown to her, but because she had come under the protection of a wealthy, influential man. She could feel the weight of the judgment even if no one spoke directly to her. Thomas led her past the main square, stopping at the stable where several ranch hands worked. "Here is work you can do if you choose," he said. "Helping with animals, fixing fences, assisting where needed. It will be hard, but it is honest labor, and people respect those who work with diligence." Mary looked at the hands roughened by work, the worn boots, and the calloused faces, and she felt both hope and fear. She had spent years managing her own small ranch, but she had never worked in a place like this, where people watched her closely, measuring her every move. She took a deep breath. "I can do that," she said softly, trying to sound confident. "I know how to care for animals and work the land." Thomas nodded approvingly.
"Good. Remember, Mary, you do not need to impress anyone but yourself."
"Do your work well, and respect will follow. Ignore the whispers. Focus on what you can control." For the next few days, Mary threw herself into the work. She fed the horses, mended fences, and helped the ranch hands wherever needed. She quickly proved herself capable, her experience on her family's ranch evident in the care she showed to the animals and the precision of her work. Slowly, some townspeople began to notice, nodding approval rather than whispering. Others continued to question why a man like Thomas would take such an interest in a girl like her. One afternoon, as Mary was cleaning the stable, she overheard two women speaking nearby. "I don't understand why Mr. Reed is helping her," one said, her voice low but sharp. "She's just a girl from nowhere. It's not proper." The other woman shook her head. "I've seen her work. She's capable." Maybe he sees something we don't. But still, a girl like that doesn't belong in his world.
Mary's hands froze over the pitchfork.
She wanted to defend herself, to say that she did not want anything beyond work and kindness, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she lowered her head and continued her task, letting her actions speak louder than their judgment. That evening, Thomas found her sitting quietly by the inn's fire, looking thoughtful. "Mary," he said gently, "you cannot control what people say, but you can control how you respond. Do your work well, show kindness, and let your actions speak for you. In time, people will see the truth." Mary nodded slowly. She wanted to trust him, but the doubts and whispers gnawed at her. She had always been judged for being young, for being alone, and for having lost everything. Now she had to learn to stand tall despite it, to believe in herself even when the town questioned her worth. Days turned into weeks. Mary began to find a rhythm, and gradually the town started to accept her presence. Ranch hands respected her work ethic. Children began to smile and wave, and even some townspeople offered nods of approval. Yet not all were convinced. The gossip persisted, often focused on Thomas's unusual kindness rather than Mary's abilities. One afternoon, a local businessman confronted Thomas. "I don't know why you're wasting your time on her," he said, his tone a mixture of concern and disapproval. "She's from nowhere, and you have a reputation to protect. People will talk, and it could harm your standing in the town." Thomas listened calmly, his expression steady. "I understand your concern," he replied, "but what I do is not about reputation. It is about doing what is right. This girl needed help, and I could provide it. That is all that matters." The businessman frowned, but said nothing further. Thomas's words, firm and unwavering, left little room for argument. He had made his choice, and he would not let the town's judgment sway him. Mary watched the interaction from a distance. She felt a mixture of awe and gratitude. Thomas was willing to stand up for her, even against the opinions of others, even when it might be inconvenient or misunderstood. She realized that his loyalty was not superficial. It was genuine, steadfast, and something she had never experienced before. Despite the whispers and occasional glances of doubt, Mary began to feel more confident. She knew her worth, and she had the support of someone who believed in her. She also realized that she was starting to care for Thomas in ways she had not anticipated. His quiet strength, patience, and integrity had begun to leave a mark on her heart, but she kept those feelings tucked away, careful not to let them show too soon. The town, meanwhile, continued to react in its own way. Some people were inspired by the partnership between Thomas and Mary, seeing it as a reminder that kindness and hard work could overcome prejudice. Others remained skeptical, believing that a girl like her could not truly belong in the life of a man like Thomas. The tension created a subtle undercurrent that neither Mary nor Thomas could ignore, but both chose to rise above it. One evening, as Mary walked with Thomas through the town square, she noticed a small group of children playing in the snow. They waved at her, calling her name, and she smiled, feeling a warmth that had little to do with the fire in her inn room. Thomas watched her, noticing the change in her demeanor. The way her shoulders were straighter, the light in her eyes brighter. "You see," he said softly, "people notice what is good and true. Ignore the rest. Your actions, your character, and your strength speak louder than words or gossip." Mary nodded, feeling a quiet determination take hold. She understood now that life was rarely fair, but resilience, kindness, and integrity could carve a path, even through adversity. And with Thomas by her side, she felt she could face anything. That night, as she lay in her small bed at the inn, Mary reflected on the weeks that had passed. She had arrived cold, frightened, and unsure of her place in the world. Now she had work, support, and the growing respect of the town. She also had someone who believed in her unconditionally, a man whose actions spoke louder than anyone's whispers. And yet, she knew that challenges were still ahead. The town's gossip would not disappear entirely, and not everyone would accept her. There would be moments of doubt, of scrutiny, and perhaps even rejection, but she had learned that true strength came from within, from the courage to face adversity with dignity and patience. As the fire burned low and the inn grew quiet, Mary realized that she was no longer just surviving. She was beginning to live. And she knew that the bond forming between her and Thomas was becoming something deeper, something built not on expectation or wealth, but on respect, trust, and the shared experience of facing life's hardships together. For the first time in months, Mary felt a sense of peace. The whispers of the town, the cold nights, and the fear of being alone no longer held the power they once had. She had a place, a purpose, and a connection that could not be shaken by judgment or rumor. And with Thomas's steady presence by her side, she was beginning to understand what it meant to truly belong. Winter had begun to loosen its grip on the small town. The snow was thinning, leaving muddy paths and patches of frozen grass. The cold was still sharp, but the days were longer, and the promise of spring lingered in the air. For Mary, these changes in the weather mirrored changes in her life. She had grown more confident, more capable, and more aware of her place in the town. The whispers of gossip still lingered, but their power had weakened. She was no longer the fragile girl who had arrived trembling on a freezing platform. She was someone who could stand tall and face the world. One morning, Thomas approached her with a thoughtful expression. "Mary," he said, "there is a situation at the ranch on the east edge of town. The snow and ice damaged several fences, and the livestock are in danger. The family asked for help. You have experience? Would you be willing to assist?" Mary felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. This was a chance to show her skills, to prove that she was more than just a girl saved by a wealthy man.
"Yes," she said firmly.
"I can help." Thomas nodded approvingly. "Good. You will not be alone. I will go with you, and a few of the ranch hands will assist. But your knowledge will be valuable." They asked specifically for someone who understands livestock and fences. The trip to the ranch was cold and muddy. The thawing snow made the paths slippery, and Mary struggled at first, carrying tools and supplies. Yet, with every step, she felt a growing sense of purpose. She was not just surviving now. She was contributing, proving herself in a practical, meaningful way. When they arrived, the scene was worse than Mary had imagined. Fences lay broken, cattle wandered close to danger, and the ranch hands looked overwhelmed. Thomas introduced her to the ranch owner, a stern man named Mr. Holloway, who eyed her skeptically. "Are you sure a girl can manage this?" he asked. Mary straightened, meeting his gaze. "I can. I grew up on a ranch. I know how to care for animals and repair fences. I'll help." The ranch hands exchanged glances, some skeptical, some curious. Thomas simply nodded, letting Mary take the lead. "She knows what she's doing," he said quietly. "Listen to her instructions." Mary wasted no time. She organized the ranch hands, assigning tasks based on their strengths. She checked on the livestock, ensuring they were safe and fed. Then led the repair of fences, demonstrating techniques to prevent future damage. Her confidence and knowledge impressed even the most doubtful men, and soon the work moved efficiently. As the day wore on, Mary felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The cold, the mud, and the physical labor did not bother her. Each fence repaired, each animal secured, was proof that she was capable. The whispers of the town that had once followed her seemed distant now, powerless against the reality of her skills and determination. Thomas worked quietly alongside her, offering assistance when needed but allowing Mary to lead. He watched with a quiet pride as she commanded respect through competence and composure. It was a different kind of bond than the one that had formed in the warmth of the inn by the fire. Here in the field they shared purpose and responsibility, and their connection deepened in subtle ways. Through shared labor, mutual respect, and trust in each other's judgment. By late afternoon, the work was nearly complete. The livestock were safe, the fences sturdy, and the ranch hands exhausted but satisfied. Even Mr. Biav, Holloway, who had doubted Mary at first, nodded in approval. "You did well," he said simply. "I didn't think you had it in you, but you proved me wrong." Mary felt a flush of pride. She had faced doubt, skepticism, and physical challenges, and she had succeeded. Yet she remained humble. "It was a team effort," she said softly, glancing at Thomas and the ranch hands. "We all worked together." On the way back to town, Mary felt a new confidence growing inside her. The experience at the ranch had shown her not only what she was capable of, but also that people's opinions, even when harsh or critical, could be overcome by action and integrity. She began to understand that true respect was earned through deeds, not rumors. When they returned, the town's attention was unavoidable. Word of Mary's efforts at the ranch had already spread, and townspeople gathered to hear the story. Many were impressed, some surprised, and a few still skeptical. Mary felt a flutter of nervousness, but also a quiet satisfaction. She had faced judgment and skepticism and emerged stronger. Thomas stayed at her side as they walked through the town square. "See," he said quietly, "people notice what is done, not what is said. You have proven yourself. Do not doubt your worth." Mary nodded, her eyes reflecting gratitude and determination. She realized that Thomas's faith in her had been unwavering from the start, and that support had given her the courage to face her fears and challenges. She had learned that kindness and trust were not weaknesses but sources of strength. Over the next few weeks, Mary continued to work in the town, assisting with ranches, helping in the inn, and offering guidance wherever her skills were needed. The townspeople's opinion of her began to shift. Respect replaced whispers, and admiration replaced doubt. She found herself welcomed in ways she had never imagined, not as a girl in need, but as a competent, capable young woman. Throughout all this, Thomas remained a steady presence. He never demanded anything, never expected repayment or recognition. He offered guidance, encouragement, and quiet protection, allowing Mary to grow without pressure. Their connection deepened naturally, built on mutual respect, shared experience, and the subtle recognition of each other's strengths. One evening, as they walked along the edge of the town toward the river, Mary spoke quietly. "I never imagined I could feel like this, like I belonged somewhere, like I can make a difference. I thought my life was over when I left my ranch." Thomas smiled gently. "Life has a way of surprising us," he said. "It tests us, challenges us, and sometimes it brings people together in ways we do not expect. You have worked hard, Mary, and you have proven your worth, not just to the town, but to yourself. That is something no one can take away." Mary looked at him, feeling a warmth she could not fully explain. She realized that her admiration for him had grown into something deeper, something that made her heart beat faster when he was near. Yet she kept her feelings private, unsure how to express them without disrupting the balance they had established. As winter continued to give way to spring, the town began to change its perception of Mary. Children sought her out for guidance, ranchers asked for her advice, and neighbors offered smiles and greetings. The girl who had arrived on a freezing platform weeks ago had become a valued member of the community, respected for her skills, courage, and integrity. And through it all, her connection with Thomas remained steady, unspoken yet undeniable. Together they had faced judgment, skepticism, and challenges, and they had emerged stronger. Mary had discovered her own strength, and Thomas had found someone whose courage and resilience matched his own. The experience at the ranch had been a turning point. It had shown Mary that she could influence the world around her, that her actions mattered, and that respect and trust were earned through effort and character. It had also demonstrated the power of partnership, of working alongside someone who believed in her abilities and encouraged her growth. That night, as Mary sat by the fire in the inn, she felt a quiet satisfaction. The town's opinion no longer frightened her, and she understood that challenges would continue to arise. But she also knew that with perseverance, skill, and the support of Thomas, she could face whatever came next. The bond forming between them was no longer just about gratitude or kindness. It was about shared values, mutual respect, and the quiet strength of two people building something together. Mary drifted to sleep that night with a sense of peace she had never known. She had faced doubt and judgment and emerged with her dignity intact, her skills recognized, and her confidence strengthened, and she knew that whatever the future held, she would not face it alone. Spring was approaching, and with it, new opportunities and challenges. But for the first time in her life, Mary felt ready to meet them head-on, secure in her own abilities and supported by a man who had chosen to believe in her from the very beginning. And though the town still whispered, she understood now that those whispers could not touch the bond she had formed, nor could they diminish the respect she had earned. Mary had proven herself, not just as a capable ranch girl, but as a person of courage, integrity, and quiet strength. He had proven that true kindness and steadfast support could change a life, sometimes in ways that words alone could never capture. Together they had faced the world's judgment and emerged stronger, laying the foundation for a story that would ripple through the town for years to come. Spring had arrived in the town, softening the harsh edges of winter with longer days and warmer sunlight. Flowers began to peek through the thawing ground, and the streets, once cold and empty, were alive with movement. The air carried a faint scent of fresh grass and earth, a reminder that life continued despite hardship. For Mary, the change in season reflected a change in her own life. She had grown stronger, more confident, and more certain of who she was. The town, too, had begun to change. Word of Mary's work at the ranches, her help at the inn, and her quiet courage had spread. Even those who had once whispered doubts now nodded with respect when they saw her. The girl who had arrived at the train station, cold, frightened, and alone, was now recognized as someone capable, skilled, and dignified. But the story was not just about her achievements. It was about the bond that had grown between her and Thomas Reed, the wealthy cowboy who had first offered her shelter and kindness. One afternoon, Thomas invited Mary to ride with him across the outskirts of the town. She hesitated for only a moment, then mounted the horse beside him. They rode along the riverbank, where the water ran freely, thawed by the warmth of the season. The sunlight reflected off the ripples, sparkling like tiny diamonds. It was a peaceful scene, almost magical in its simplicity, and for a moment, the weight of past challenges seemed to lift. Thomas glanced at Mary as they rode side by side. "You have done well, Mary," he said, his voice calm but sincere. "Not just with the ranches or the work, but with yourself. You have faced doubt, judgment, and hardship, and yet you have remained steadfast. That is not something everyone can do." Mary felt her cheeks warm. She had come to care deeply for Thomas, and his words stirred something inside her that she had kept hidden. Hope, affection, and something more she was only beginning to understand.
"I couldn't have done it without your guidance," she said softly.
You believed in me when I didn't even believe in myself. Thomas looked ahead, then back at her, a gentle seriousness in his eyes. Belief is easy when someone shows courage and integrity. You have both, Mary. That is why I never doubted you. The ride continued in silence, but it was a comfortable silence, one filled with shared understanding. As they returned to town, they passed through the square, where townspeople paused to watch. Children waved, neighbors nodded, and even the previously skeptical ranchers offered smiles of approval. Mary realized that her presence, once a source of gossip and doubt, had become something the town respected and appreciated. That evening, Thomas invited Mary to the inn's porch, where they could sit and watch the sunset over the town. The sky glowed in shades of gold and pink, reflecting off the rooftops and the river. Mary felt a calm settle over her. She had faced so many challenges, yet here she was, warm, safe, respected, and slowly understanding the depth of her own heart. "Mary," Thomas began, his tone gentle but deliberate, "there is something I want to say." He paused, as if weighing the words carefully. "From the first moment I saw you on that freezing platform, I knew I had to help. But as time has passed, I've come to realize something more. I care for you, deeply, not out of pity or obligation, but because of who you are, strong, honest, and remarkable." Mary's breath caught. She had felt a growing warmth for Thomas, but hearing him speak so openly made her heart race. I care for you too," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I felt it for some time, but I didn't know if it was right to say it." Thomas reached out, taking her hand gently.
"It is right," he said simply. "And I want us to face the future together, whatever it may hold."
"You are not alone anymore, Mary, and I do not want you to be." Tears welled in Mary's eyes, but they were tears of relief and happiness rather than fear. She had spent so long surviving, so long fearing judgment and rejection, that the promise of love, steady, sincere, and mutual, felt almost unreal. But it was real, and she chose to embrace it. The next days were filled with small but meaningful moments. They walked together through the town, shared meals at the inn, and helped ranchers with tasks that required two sets of hands. The townspeople noticed the bond between them. The whispers of doubt and gossip faded into admiration, as people saw that their relationship was built on mutual respect, trust, and shared experience rather than wealth or status. One afternoon, a small celebration was held in the town square to honor the work done to repair ranches after the winter storms. Mary was recognized for her contributions, and the townspeople applauded her courage and skill. She stood beside Thomas, holding his hand, feeling both pride and joy. The very people who had once doubted her now cheered for her achievements, and she realized how far she had come. Thomas whispered in her ear, "You've earned this, not just the applause, but the respect. You've shown everyone what it means to persevere." Mary squeezed his hand. "And I've had the best partner to help me along the way," she replied, her voice filled with warmth and affection. As the evening settled, the town grew quiet once more. The streets were empty, and the only sounds were the distant laughter of children returning home and the gentle flow of the river. Mary and Thomas walked to the riverbank, where the water reflected the glow of the setting sun. They paused, standing side by side, feeling the serenity of the moment.
"You know," Mary said softly, "I never imagined life could be like this."
I thought I was alone forever, that I would always be just surviving. But now, I feel like I belong, like I have a future worth looking forward to." Thomas smiled, his eyes reflecting the fading sunlight. "And you do belong, Mary. You belong here, with the town, and with me. What we have, it is built on truth, strength, and care. That is something that can never be taken away."
For a long moment, they stood in silence, simply enjoying each other's presence.
The hardships of winter, the skepticism of the town, and the fear of uncertainty had all shaped them, but they had endured and grown stronger. Now, standing together, they faced the world not as individuals burdened by the past, but as partners ready to embrace the future. Days turned into weeks, and the town continued to thrive with the arrival of spring. Mary and Thomas were seen together often, helping wherever they could, offering guidance and support to those in need. The townspeople came to accept not only Mary's presence, but also the love that had blossomed between them. What had once been a story whispered with skepticism became a story celebrated for courage, kindness, and integrity. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Thomas and Mary sat by the fire in the inn's common room. The warmth of the fire, the smell of wood smoke, and the quiet murmur of the inn's patrons created a sense of comfort and belonging. Thomas looked at Mary, his expression serious yet tender. "Mary," he said, "we've come a long way. From the freezing platform to here, we've faced doubt, hardship, and challenge. And yet, through it all, we've found each other. I want to keep building this life with you, every day, side by side." Mary reached for his hand, her eyes shining. "I want that too," she said. "I want to face whatever comes next with you. We've learned so much about strength, trust, and kindness. And I know that together we can face anything." The fire crackled as they held hands, the warmth spreading not just through their bodies but through their hearts. In that quiet, simple moment, they understood that the trials of the past had led them to this point: a life shared, a love earned, and a future filled with possibility. The town continued to buzz with life, but Mary and Thomas had found their own space within it, a space of respect, love, and partnership. The story of a wealthy cowboy helping a freezing ranch girl had become more than a tale of kindness. It was a story of resilience, integrity, and the transformative power of care. It reminded the townspeople that one act of goodness could ripple outward, changing lives and perceptions. And for Mary and Thomas, the story was far from over. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one written together, guided by mutual respect, shared experience, and a love that had grown quietly but powerfully through winter hardships and town challenges. As the stars appeared in the night sky above the small town, they sat together in silence, knowing that no matter what the future held, they had found something enduring and true. And in the hearts of the townspeople, their love became a symbol, a reminder that courage, kindness, and partnership could reshape lives and communities alike. The freezing train station where Mary had first arrived felt like a distant memory, a chapter of struggle that had led her to warmth, safety, and love. And Thomas, who had stopped to offer a simple act of kindness, had discovered that true connection could not be bought or forced. It had to be earned, nurtured, and shared. Together they faced the night, the town, and the future with steady hearts, knowing that their story, born in hardship, strengthened by trust, and sealed by love, would be remembered for generations as a story of hope, courage, and the quiet power of one human being reaching out to another.